I'm quite fond of revisiting games that I've played before. Sometimes it's for nostalgia, and a good nostalgic game can take me back to my childhood, whether it's running in the fields of Ocarina of Time, beating my friends in Tekken 5, or being horrified and forever changed by the ending of Metal Gear Solid 2.
I hear it's amazing when the famous purple stuffed worm in Flapjaw Space with the tuning fork does a raw blink on Harry Carey Rock. I need scissors. 61. What the fuck?
Sometimes I like to replay more recent releases and see if there's any way I could have played them differently, perhaps on a harder difficulty, or maybe by picking different story choices that could show me a different side to the characters I know and love. And sometimes I decide to play a game and make a video on it based on the overwhelming majority of views it's gotten on my channel. Dragon's Dogma is a game that ticks all of those boxes for me, being both a nostalgic game and a game that has countless differences with every playthrough. So I thought it just kind of made sense to take a closer look at this game and see if it's still worth picking up all these years later. We'll be taking a close look at everything this game does, from the combat to the story to the open world and everything in between. Dragon's Dogma first came out on May 22nd, all the way back in the ancient times, also known as 2012, and released on the PS3 and Xbox 360. It actually got some pretty great reception all around, gaining 8 out of 10s all across the board and earning itself a 78 on Metacritic. So it's fair to say that people definitely liked the game, and it sold really well in Japan, exceeding the expectations of Capcom, while over in the West it wasn't doing as well. It's fair to say that on release, and for a good while after it, Dragon's Dogma stayed as a cult hit rather than a big blockbuster release, even with the fairly good reception it had garnered, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? Around 6 months after Skyrim comes out, and no one is still on a fantasy kick and wants to try their hand on another open world fantasy game? Crazier still to me is the fact that this game was directed by Hideaki Itsuno, and if you don't know who that is, this is the guy that directed the Devil May Cry series. And trust me, that fact is going to make a lot of sense later on. Dragon's Dogma had a lot of sources for inspiration when it came to it, with Itsuno saying that games like Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, Dragon Quest, Fable, and even Oblivion inspired the creation of Dragon's Dogma. But the desire with this game was to make an open world experience that functioned more like an action game than its counterparts. Though it was important to them to still make the game feel like a more traditional RPG, with party members and a more XP oriented mindset, all done through the mold of a fairly standard open world RPG that is filled with tons of strange choices and nuance. There was also a re-release of Dragon's Dogma titled Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, which featured a lot of balance changes made to each of the classes, new items, new abilities, as well as some of the other stuff that I'll mention later on in the video.
Nice.
But to me, the most baffling choice they made was to change the title music. In the original game, we had this completely out of place song that didn't fit in at all with the game's aesthetics or even the other tracks in the game. But it did have a certain charm to it and lent itself to the idea that this game was a hot box of different ideas thrown together to create something unique. In Dark Arisen, we have a pretty boring and generic song that doesn't really have the same punch as Into Free did.
Well, that's all a lie. Nope.
Oh, and I forgot to mention that the original game had these ugly black bars to give it this weird letterbox sort of look for some reason. No idea why they did that, but now it's in full screen and looks great. Overall, Dark Arisen is just a much better game than what the original game was, so that's pretty cool. The first thing I want to cover here is the story, because it is arguably the least interesting part of the game. Well, for the most part anyway, and I don't really mean that the story is bad or anything, it's just that the story of Dragon's Dogma is, on the surface, nothing special at all. If you've played or seen almost anything that is vaguely set in a medieval fantasy, you can probably guess what's going on here. And I'll be real with you, for my first playthrough, I thought that the story in this game was god-awful. It's extremely generic, and I can guarantee you, if you're anything like me, you won't give a shit because, I mean, there's a dragon. It's cool. Alright, I'm gonna set the stage. The game starts us off right in the thick of the action. We're in a little dark cave with a pawn.
Hello there.
We're gonna get into that in a minute, standing just opposite us. Pretty quickly we find out, oh shit, that's a dragon. We then descend further into the little mini dungeon, kill a few enemies, get 2 more pawns, and fight our first boss in the game. After you kill it, you hear the sexy voice of what we assume is the dragon, and then the game fades to black. Countless lifetimes come to pass. CG cutscene, dragon falls through a portal, harpies are flying everywhere, eats a couple, and boom, we got an instigating event. Character creation happens, we'll get to that later. We're in a village with what seems like a nice peaceful life, where our main character is beloved by everyone, and then all our peace is ruined by a pesky little fucker named Grigori, also known as the Dragon. Your character tries to fight off the dragon alone, and gets defeated almost instantly. What happens then is actually kinda cool. The dragon, noticing that you managed to stab a sword into his palm, decides that you might be a worthy challenge after all, and decides to, steal your heart. You wake up in a shack, take a sword in your hand, and decide, you know what? It's time to go and explore the world and get your heart back from the dragon. Okay. Like I said before, it all just kind of feels generic. The setup here isn't really anything special, though the part where he steals your heart was actually pretty cool. Though even that is just like that film Dragonheart, just in reverse. Great film, by the way, go watch it. But like I said, if you've seen any film or played any game where you're a chosen hero, you aren't getting anything different here. But that's actually something that they do handle in a pretty cool way. See, when the dragon takes your heart, you become an Arisen, the one person whose fate is tied to the dragon, and the only one who can take it down. To a lot of people in the game, you're seen as a hero and as someone to look up to, which is fairly standard in games like these. And of course, you have some people that don't like you very much and set up a cult that worships the destruction that the dragon will bring when you die. It's all fairly normal. But as you progress through the game, you learn that being an Arisen might not be the coolest thing in the world after all, and if you pay close attention to how some of the NPCs interact with you, you get a sense that there may be a little something else going on here. Alright, I'm gonna be getting into some spoilers now, so if you're not here for that, if you're just here for the review part of this video, skip to the timestamp that's on the screen right now. Alright, I'm gonna assume you've done that. Alright, you can go. Okay, I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. The story in this game is actually very fucking good. Okay. So in the story, you meet various characters that either were previously Arisens or pawns to former Arisens, and this doesn't make sense if the Arisen is either meant to kill the dragon or be killed by the dragon, then these guys shouldn't be here at all. Well, when you eventually go on to fight the dragon, he decides to give you a choice just before. He will pick whichever character you have the most affinity with. Essentially, it's the romance system. Essentially, whoever you wanted to bone the most gets kidnapped, and the choice is this. Fight the dragon and potentially die and let the world be destroyed, or sacrifice your beloved and walk right out of there and leave it to whoever the next Arisen is. Now obviously this choice is kind of a no-brainer, and deciding to sacrifice your beloved takes you to a game over screen anyway, but it's an interesting idea, and it's why we see characters like the Duke, who is an archetype that in most stories like this acts as the noble mentor figure for our character, act weird sometimes. He sacrificed his beloved and is suffering from the trauma of it every day. Celine, the girl in the woods, was a pawn to another Arisen who had died, and since she hasn't really had a purpose, she's just kind of stayed in a treehouse for a long time. It's a really interesting way to deal with the whole chosen hero trope, because it shows that most people just aren't ready to deal with that, and that it can be a pretty tough thing to actually measure up to. But that's all I'm gonna say about the story in this video. There's an entire epilogue that I'm not even gonna mention, because that's an entire thing in itself. Just know that the game might not be as simple as you think. So this is an open world game, and as far as open world games go, this is a pretty standard affair. You've got main quests, side quests, and... Oh, that's actually it. Yeah, this game is kind of barren on the open world front, I'll be real. The general framework that every open world game has is here, but if you just take a look at it, it seems a little boring? There are things you can collect here and there, but they aren't really what this game is about, I'd say. The world itself is also kind of boring too. It all kind of looks the same. It's all fields with roads and a few trees here and there. Sometimes there'll be some cliffs and sometimes there'll be some water, but really, there aren't many different biomes to explore, which is fine. You don't need to have 5 different regions that all have their own weather patterns and their own kind of grass, but a little variety would go a long way. The actual exploration isn't really that interesting either, because there isn't much to see in the open world. Apart from one major city and a fishing village, you don't really have anywhere to thoroughly explore. You might find an abandoned fort or two or a mine out there, but again, they're kind of boring and there isn't much to them. But, and here's the big but, I know I sound like I'm shitting on this game, I still enjoy exploring this world regardless of how empty it is. And that is due to a couple of reasons. First of all, the map only reveals itself as long as you've been to that place already, which gives the world this kind of never-ending feeling that makes it feel a whole lot bigger than it actually is. Then the world is populated by a handful of different bosses that are just kind of chilling out, and they make for some great unexpected encounters along the road. And the general feeling of exploration feels exciting because enemies are kind of dangerous in this game, and since there's only two main locations where you can rest up and get equipment, it makes the experience a little more thrilling. It feels a little bit like a roguelike in a strange way, where death feels pretty likely every time you go out and explore the world. And also because the autosave system is pretty trash, but you can save whenever, so it isn't really a big deal. Now, we have to talk about fast travel because fast travel is an entire beast in itself. Fast travel was altered a little bit in Dark Arisen. In the original game, fast travel was only possible if you had two things, a port crystal and a fairy stone. What you would do is you would place a port crystal at the location you wanted to travel to, or you might find that some important location in the world would have a port crystal there already and you would just have to discover it. But in most instances, you'd have to find a port crystal out in the world and place it down to mark where you'd want to fast travel to. And you could only travel to them in the first place if you had a fairy stone, which would then be used up and you'd need to go buy another one before you fast traveled again. This meant that you spent a lot of time running around in the same places again and again because you didn't have a fairy stone to go back to where you wanted to go. In Dark Arisen, they added more port crystals and an eternal fairy stone that can be used an infinite number of times, so it's safe to say that it made it a lot better. Oh, and the quests in this game are a bit of a mixed bag too. There are some amazing quests that need you to explore old catacombs or help reclaim an old fort against a goblin army, but there are glaring issues here too. First off, the signposting for a lot of the quests is terrible, and sometimes you won't really know what you should be doing. You can figure it out pretty easily, of course, but a lot of time could be saved if the game was just clearer about telling you what to do. I'm already just following an orange circle on my map, so it isn't like the game wants me to be fully independent with exploration or anything. Also, finding quests can be pretty tricky too. You have to look out for these green boxes over people's heads, and sometimes it can be pretty easy to miss. Oh, and another thing that sucks is that quests have a kind of time limit to them. Well, it's more like a quest limit where if you advance too far in the story, it means that you can't do a certain quest anymore. This on its own is fine. I don't mind that system at all, and I think it can encourage replayability to make sure you get to those quests in the next playthrough. What I hate is that the game does not warn you that moving on to the next quest could just fail or delete another quest from being accessed. Or I'll be able to start a quest, but because I've done one too many main quests, it'll just instantly fail the mission. Fuck! I mean, I'm just complaining about this game at this point. I will say though, that when it comes to exploring the major city of Grand Soren and other urban areas like it, it's actually pretty cool. There is a kind of parkour system in the game where your character can, wait for it because this is very cool, grab ledges. And this makes a huge difference to how you traverse the environment because you can actually explore these places vertically, which sometimes can get you some pretty great rewards or just give you a little treat for your good work. And of course, we have to talk about the exclusive area that came with Dark Arisen, and that is Bitter Black Isle. This area is a place that you can go to pretty much from the start of the game, even though it's meant for the post-game. Bitter Black Isle is full of unique loot and enemies, so it's a place where you can get some really powerful stuff. But of course, it isn't as easy as that because this place also has the hardest enemies and bosses in the game. Even after beating the game again, I encountered a boss that could still one-shot me. So this place isn't for the faint of heart. The aesthetics here are unlike any other part of the game, which is a very good thing. Sure, the main game has catacombs and some more, creepy places, I guess, but this place is like a full-on horror game. Little touches like how every now and then you'll hear the ghosts of other people that have come here and died give the area a lot of atmosphere, which adds a nice little spicy hit of fear and terror. Plus, the way that all of these structures have either collapsed or been built so close together adds a lot of room for exploration, allowing you to engage in these interesting platform puzzles to get some rare loot. Something that helps the exploration are abilities like the double jump, which gives us the perfect segue to talk about the class system in this game. And it is, in my opinion, still one of the best class systems we've had in an open world RPG. The class system in this game is based on vocations. In total, there are 9 different vocations that all feel individual in their own way. At the start, you get the choice between 3 basic vocations: Fighter, Strider, and Mage. And just by looking at them, you can probably tell what they are. The Fighter is a class that excels in close-range combat and defense. The Strider is great at range and for running in and out of combat with its quick attacks. And the Mage is great at support and targeting the elemental weaknesses of your enemies. You later gain access to 2 other kinds of vocations in the form of advanced vocations and hybrid vocations. Advanced vocations are usually just a more powerful version of their basic counterpart, like how the Ranger is just a Strider with a bigger and slower bow. Though this doesn't make the basic vocations suddenly obsolete, since every class has unique abilities that they can learn. Hybrid vocations are classes that slap together aspects from other vocations, like the Magic Archer, which is a mix between a Strider and a Mage. The best part of this system is that you can change your vocation whenever you want to, allowing you to experiment with different playstyles and mess around a bit until you find the right class for you. And they're all pretty cool, so it is worth it to dip your toe into each vocation at some point, because, hey, their masterworks all, you can't go wrong. Which brings us here, to the aspect of the game that truly shines: the combat. The way that combat generally works here is pretty simple. In fact, this combat system is really simple overall. You've got a light attack, a heavy attack, a jump, and that's it for your basic movement. There aren't any fancy combos or anything like that. Well, you also get an extra attack for your light and heavy moves, but they aren't really anything special. They're just there to vary things up at least a little bit. But again, these are just your basic moves and aren't really what makes the combat so great. The other side to combat is your vocation's core skills and weapon skills. Core skills are moves that apply to both combat and exploration. This is where you'll unlock things like a double jump, dodge roll, and other small abilities that generally make your character feel better to control. Then you have weapon skills, which are activated by pressing the left or right bumpers and let you access different special moves. You get to choose 3 skills for your main weapon, so your swords and daggers, and 3 skills for your other thing, like your shield or your bow. Mages get 6 slots because they've only got their staff, so they get to cheat, that's fine. There are tons of skills you can get, and a lot of them are class dependent too. So even if classes use daggers as their main weapon, they'll probably have different skills that can only be used by those respective classes. These skills are really where the combat shines, because your success hinges on you being able to use them effectively alongside your light and heavy attacks. This leads to some battles having a really fast-paced energy to them, where you're softening the enemy up with some light attacks and follow up with an attack that sends them up in the air, and then you throw some fucking gunpowder in their face. Or you can just pick them up and throw them off a cliff or something, you know, whatever works. Where this combat really shines is during its boss fights, and if you know anything about Dragon's Dogma, you might know that the boss fights here are pretty good. Most of the time, these encounters will have you facing something 4 times your size and with a lot of health, so it's down to you and your party to take these motherfuckers down. Every boss feels completely different to fight since they all have completely different weaknesses, and movesets, and everything. They're different bosses. Chimeras can be taken down in stages where you kill the snake tail, and then you kill the weird goat hump thing, and then you focus your attacks on the lion's head. A Cyclops can be taken out by pelting his one good eye with hundreds of arrows at once. And almost every boss can be climbed up, Shadow of the Colossus style, allowing you and your pawns to completely overwhelm them. But early on, they can still fuck you up. Overall, the combat is brutal, fast-paced, and often stylish, and when the camera isn't rammed between a Cyclops' ass and the cliff face, it all works really well. It almost feels like an action game. In fact, this really is what sets Dragon's Dogma apart from other RPGs of its kind. The robust class system along with the really satisfying combat gives the game a unique edge. There's still a huge part of the game that I haven't even touched yet because it is arguably the most important part of the game, and that is the pawn system. Alongside your character, you also get to create your pawn, and the best way to think about them is that they're like Navi with arms, legs, and a thirst for blood.
Let their blood rain from the sky!
Your pawn is your trusty sidekick that stays by your side throughout the game. You get to choose how it acts in combat and the vocation it uses, allowing them to fulfill any role that you need them to, whether it's a support role or a more aggressive, kill everything kind of role. And pawns aren't just good at combat either. As you progress through the game's quests, they'll give you some hints or guidance if you're stuck. Sometimes this information can be a little, cryptic, but it makes them feel a lot more interesting overall. Pawns can also slowly learn how to take down enemies more effectively as they travel with you, with them learning about the different weaknesses of every enemy they fight, meaning that as they learn, they'll become even more useful in combat. Oh, and you can also sit your pawn down and tell them that everything they're doing is wrong and that they need to change their personality to fit in with the group better. But it isn't just you two taking on the world and facing all of the challenges. You can have a max party of 4, you, your pawn, and 2 other pawns. The other pawns can come from randomly generated NPCs in the world, or they can be from other players. See, every pawn that a player makes also gets sent out into the wild, where they can be recruited by another player, whether that player just sees them walking on the side of the road or if they use a rift stone to recruit them. Rift stones are the fastest and easiest way to get a particular kind of pawn, and you can even search using filters to find the exact pawn that you're looking for. The pawn system is probably the one thing that has kept this game going on for as long as it has, and it's easy to see why. Even though the game is technically over 8 years old now, you can still recruit the pawns of other players and add them to your party, forming this really cool connection between everyone that plays this game. It's a really cool feeling to know that even when you're done with the game and have put it down, your pawn is still out there helping others. Your mark on the game doesn't just get forgotten, and that's a really nice feeling. In conclusion, Dragon's Dogma is a special game. Even though it took heavy inspiration from a lot of games, it still doesn't really feel like it's copying any of them. Even the storyline, a rather unassuming and boring thing to actually try to describe, makes you think that there isn't really all that much going on before blowing you away with its last few hours. Its combat and general gameplay loop are very satisfying to mess around with and have fun in, allowing you to have real choice over how you build your character and face certain challenges. But for me, the most impressive thing that this game has done is cultivate a community. The moment that you step into this game, it already feels like this world is inhabited, and not by the bland NPCs who speak very cliche and frankly weird old English to you, but by the pawns that are the extensions of players from all around the world. And I hope that if you decide to give this game a go, or if you're gonna go back to it and spend more time in that world, that you might get a little help from my good friend, Gregor.